Okay. So we have again naming inorganic compounds. Okay. Sige, we will be discussing the set of rules in naming and briefly explore a little of the organic world lang. So table of contents, we have here the ionic compounds, molecular compounds. We will also talk about acids and bases and just a little of organic compounds. So take note, we are going to name and make chemical formula of inorganic compounds, plus those compounds that do not have carbon. Because if they do have carbon, even if the carbon is bonded to other elements, those will be under organic compounds or organic chemistry, the study of organic chemistry. Now, please take note of the following. We have carbon-containing compounds that are considered to be inorganic. Again, these are the exceptions to the rule. We have carbon-containing compounds na doon sila naggrupo sa inorganic carbon. So we have carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, carbon disulfide, and those compounds that contain the cyanide group. Because remember, when you say cyanide, you can look at your index cards for this. Cyanide is carbon and nitrogen -1. And also compounds containing carbonate and bicarbonate also belong to the inorganic compounds. Because these compounds class behave just like the inorganic compounds, so we don't classify them doon sa organic na side. So just take note of these exceptions. Now we have 4 categories of our inorganic compounds. We have the so-called ionic, molecular, acids and bases, and lastly we have the hydrides. We will start with the ionic. I believe you are very familiar with the ionics na pag sinabing ionic class, meaning dyan meron tayong ions, and these compounds are made up of both positively charged ions and negatively charged ions. So meron ka talagang cation and anion sa iyong components ng compound. So most of the cations, just take note of this para hindi kayo malito, most of our cations are actually metals. Meron lang tayong nasali dyan na NH4+, which is actually a polyatomic ion. Again, polyatomic ion siya, but it is positively charged and it is not a metal. The rest class na cations natin ay metals. And most of our anions are non-metals. Again, they are non-metals. Aside from our non-metals, syempre, we have the other polyatomic ions. So when we name them, we just name them, like for example, sa metals, their name stays the same. So pamayon kag metal na calcium, Ca, calcium gihapon nato na siya tawagon. So ang ions class, the name of the ions are actually derived from the name of their elements. Dagdagan lang natin na word na ion or cation if they are positively charged, just like as you can see the examples on the screen. Like sodium, pag magkaroon siya ng charge, it will be called sodium ion or sodium cation. Okay? So next we have the binary compounds. So pag sinabing, by the way, para maklaro lang, itong binary compounds will be under the ionic compounds ha. So dalawang klase yung ionic compounds natin, binary and ternary. From the word itself, binary, ang ibig sabihin yan, dalawang elements lang ang meron ka doon sa compound mo. Kaya again, binary. So the first element is most likely a metal cation and the second element is a non-metal anion. So how do we name this? The metal will be named the same as the element, and then the anion will end with IDE. So ito yung nakasanayan natin. So class, on the screen you have there the list for our anions para guided kayo. Okay? Again, para guided kayo, ito yung mga anions natin. And if they are part of a binary compound as anion, their ending should be IDE. So for example, carbon will be called carbide, silicon will become silicide, and nitrogen will be called nitride, and so on. So please be familiar with this anions kasi gagamitin natin sila in naming. So what are the rules again of naming our binary compounds? First, the names of the metals do not change, and the name of the metal should have an ending na IDE. So it's actually the root of the element name plus the IDE. So for example, if you have chlorine, pag chlorine ion na siya, we will call it now chloride. And nitrogen will become nitride. So those are our rules for naming. So we have examples on the screen. Before kayo mag-name ha, i-identify nyo muna ang component niya kung meron bang metal. Pag merong metal class, automatic ionic compound yan siya. Just like when you say NaCl, if you look at your periodic table, Na belongs to group 1. Thus, it is a metal because group 1 elements except for hydrogen are all alkali metals. So we will follow these rules. Pag naay metal ha, kani atong i-follow na rule. So, we have here sodium as is ang pangalan niya, and then the second element is chlorine. Now, di ba, the second element's name should be changed to IDE sa ending niya. So the correct name for NaCl is sodium chloride. That is also true for KBr. Potassium also belongs to group 1, so this is a metal. So diretso na yung pangalan niya, class, potassium. And then, instead of bromine, we have the bromide. And then, thirdly, we have ZnI2. Zinc is a transition metal, but nevertheless, it's still a metal, so we will just name it as zinc. Do not forget, we don't use the prefixes for metals. So kahit pa class meron siyang subscript, kagaya nito ZnI2, we will just name metal as zinc and then iodine as iodide. Wala tayong pakialam kahit meron siya dyang subscript na 2. As long as it is ionic, we don't use the prefixes. Even this one, Al2O3, we all know very well that aluminum is a metal. So combined with oxygen, we will just follow the rule na aluminum will be named aluminum and oxygen will be named as oxide. Thus, Al2O3 is called aluminum oxide. Okay? Questions about naming our binary compounds. Sino pa dito ang nalilito in naming the binary compounds? Binary ha, dalawang elements lang. Kahit pa may subscript, basta dalawang element like zinc and iodine, dalawang element lang yan sila. Both of them, silang lahat ay ionic. Now, aside from the binary compounds, we also have the so-called ternary compounds. Class, ito yung merong polyatomic ions. Again, ito yung may polyatomic ions. That is why tinawag siyang ternary compounds kasi most of our polyatomic ions contain 2 elements. Tapos, i-combine mo pa siya with a metal, so nagiging 3 siya. That is why tinawag natin siyang ternary compounds. So meron tayong mga polyatomic ions class na nag-end pa rin sa IDE kagaya ng cyanide or hydroxide. Pero yung naming ganun pa rin. We have here lithium. So lithium is a metal. Always remember pag merong presence ni metal, automatic ionic siya and we don't use the prefixes. So in naming, again, the name of the metal stays as is. as the name of the element. And then, ang gagawin natin for the anion, kung ano ang name ni polyatomic ion, ganun pa rin ang isusulat natin. So, you always refer to your index cards. Ano ba ang pangalan ni OH? So, di ba, OH is hydroxide. So, idudugtong lang natin siya sa name ni metal. Thus, for this, we call this lithium hydroxide. And then another one, KCN, K is potassium again. This is a metal, so potassium, and then CN is cyanide. This is a polyatomic ion, so we have potassium cyanide. So kung nakikita nyo dyan sa screen, tatlong elements sila. Kaya tinawag na ternary compounds. Okay, so we have this table for our ions class, cations and anions. As you can see on the left side, we have the positively charged elements. Most of them are metals except for ammonium, of course. And then there are metals class na dalawa ang charge. So kung dalawa ang charge, kagaya ni where is iron? We have iron here, iron 2 or iron 3. Yun yung gagamitan natin class ng Roman numerals. So ipapasok natin siya. Example, we have this compound here, FeO. FeO is iron. And then O is oxide. Hindi lang siya iron oxide. We really have to indicate ano ang charge ni iron. Ni iron, I mean, para klaro talaga kung anong iron ang nag-exist sa compound na ito. So, kailangan ilagay natin siya in an open and closed parenthesis before the oxide. So, how do we know again? For this case, wala kasi siyang subscript. So, automatic ang sum niyan ay 0. Walang crisscross na nangyari. So, ang gagawin nyo class, you go back sa charge ni an ion. So, makikita nyo naman sa periodic table nyo na si oxygen ay -2. So, para maging equal to 0 siya, meaning si iron is +2. Kaya ang ilalagay natin dito ay iron 2 oxide. That's how you name the compound with an element na dalawa ang charge or tinatawag nating divalent. Okay? Questions so far? Alin dito ang hindi talaga naintindihan or nako-confuse pa rin hanggang ngayon? Wala? Kaya? So most of our anions class are non-metals and the rest are polyatomic ions. Okay? Polyatomic ions ang tawag sa kanila ha kasi they contain 2 or more elements and yes, they do have charges. Kaya ions pa rin sila. So always talaga yan siya ha na pag ionic compounds, meron talagang positively charged na substance and merong negatively charged na substance. Because remember our rule, opposite attracts, meaning opposite charges attract each other. Positive and negative. And always yan class na nauuna nating sinusulat si positive kesa sa negative. Hindi pwede magbaliktad na maging ganito. This is negatively charged, this is positively charged. Mauna talaga dapat si positive. So, I hope klaro yon. And then again, ito yung mga metals natin class. Mga transition metals kasi mostly ang merong tigda-dalawa ang charges. So meron tayong iron 2 and then iron 3. Now, ang tandaan ninyo, pag ang hinihingi ay systematic naming or systematic name, yun yung gagamit tayo class ng Roman numerals. Okay? Ayan. Pero pag ang hinihingi common name, again, pag hinihingi natin ay common name, that's the time we use this one. Those names that end with OUS and IC. Now, how do we know gani kung OUS or IC ang gagamitin? The element's name will end with OUS if it has the lower charge. Okay. Again, the lower charge. And then, mag-i-end naman siya sa IC if it has the higher charge. So, in the case of iron, we only have two, positive 2 and positive 3. So, definitely the positive 2 is lower. So, we will call this the ferrous iron. Common name yan. Pero pag systematic name, syempre, that's iron 2. So systematic name ang tawag kasi that is the set or the rule given by the IUPAC, the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry. And then IC hapag, higher charge, thus we call it ferric ion. So yun yung tandaan ninyo. You have to be careful and you have to be familiar of the elements na merong dalawang charge kasi importante yan during the naming. So in your screen, you have the examples of those metals. So you have there the chromium, either positive 2 or positive 3. So take note, how do we write the systematic name? We use the Roman numerals. And then for the common name, we use those names na nag-end sa OUS and IC. So you have to follow instruction. You have to read carefully the question whether you are asked to give the systematic name or you are asked to give the common name. Now in your activity, since I did not give any instruction, I'll be considering both. If you have written there the systematic name, that's correct. Pag common name naman, correct din naman pa rin. So ganun yung pag-check ko doon sa activity ninyo. So questions so far before tayo mag-jump into molecular compounds. Anyone? Wala na. So like if I write this one on the screen, how will you call this one? So anong tawag dito sa kanya? MgBr2. Anong unang step in naming? Number 1, you have to check whether it is ionic or not. How do you know if it is ionic? Meron tayong cation. Mostly, it's a metal. Okay, and then we have anion, but the anion can be a non-metal or a polyatomic ion. So how do you classify magnesium bromide? Ionic? Ionic or molecular? Molecular.
Ionic, ma'am.
Okay, very good. Molecular pag lahat sila ay non-metal. Ionic siya because class magnesium is nasa group 2A in the periodic table. And the elements in the group 2A are called alkaline earth metals. So, anong pangalan niya? If this is a metal, we just name this as magnesium as is tayo. Paano naman si bromine? Okay, very good. Instead of calling this bromine, this should end with IDE, so bromide. So we call this magnesium bromide. Okay, that's how you name our chemical compound. Okay? Questions so far? Siyempre, malalaman nyo class kung polyatomic ion kasi you will have more than 2 elements sa formula. Just like this one. So you will have more than 2 elements. Pero ionic pa rin siya kasi you still have the magnesium here. Anong tawag nga kay OH? Ang pangalan ni OH?
Oxide. Oxide po, ma'am.
Oxide po, ma'am.
Okay, this is the correct name, ha? Magnesium hydroxide. We don't call this magnesium dihydroxide. Please do not use the prefixes for ionic compounds. Again, we don't use the prefixes for ionic compounds. So kahit na may subscription dyan na 2, huwag nyo siyang tawagin na magnesium dihydroxide. Magnesium hydroxide lang talaga siya. So I hope klaro na siya, class. Ang sa ionic compounds. Now let's move on sa molecular compounds. Pag sinabing molecular compounds, these are still inorganic, but the difference now is that these compounds have non-metals only, meaning the combination is between two non-metals. And most of our molecular compounds are binary, meaning they only have two types of atoms or two types of elements as components. Pero nevertheless, they are non-metals. So non-metal plus non-metal, ito sila. And how do we name binary compounds? Actually, almost similar with that of the ionic compounds. Kasi yung second element, mag-i-end pa rin naman sa IDE. Again, mag-i-end pa rin siya sa IDE. Ang nasa screen na examples, example HCl, that's hydrogen chloride. Or HBr, hydrogen bromide, and SiC, silicon carbide, nag-end pa rin sila sa ID. I mean, I'm referring into the second element. Okay? But we have additional guidelines for the compounds, molecular compounds, kasi gagamit tayo ng prefixes. Okay, so I hope you can see on the screen the prefixes from 1 to 10. Gagamitin natin yan in naming. Pero ang number 1 na tandaan ninyo, kapag ka first element siya and isa lang ang atom niya, meaning wala tayong subscript, we don't need to write mono. Okay? We don't need to write mono if it is the first element. Just like in this example given here, we have PCl3. PCl3, this is phosphorus. So isa lang siya, wala siyang subscript. You don't need to use mono. So automatic ka na mag-phosphorus. But in the second element, we will be using the prefix tri, since tatlo dyan ang chlorine. So we call this now phosphorus trichloride, not monophosphorus trichloride. That's the first guideline, aside from using the prefixes. And then another guideline is for oxides, especially for oxides class, the ending na A for some prefixes are omitted. Is omitted. So just like this one, N2O4. N2 means dinitrogen. Ito gagamit talaga tayo ng prefix sa first element kasi meron ka na dyang subscript na 2. Kaya dinitrogen. Pero yung second element is oxygen and then we have 4, so that's tetra. Kapag ka ganun class na oxygen ang next na element, we omit the letter A. So instead of calling it tetraoxide, we'd rather call this dinitrogen tetroxide. Okay, so we have some examples here, like CO is carbon monoxide. Again, we don't use mono for the first element kapag kaisa lang siya. Just like the carbon dioxide, so sa second element, we always use the prefixes. SO2 is sulfur dioxide. SO3 is sulfur trioxide. NO2 is nitrogen dioxide. So again, as you can see, we don't really use mono if the first element is only one atom. But on the second element, yes, we always use the prefixes. And then we have the N2O4, syempre dinitrogen. And again, please omit letter A if oxygen yung next na element. Dili nato siya tawagon og tetraoxide, instead tetroxide. Or if it's 5, then we don't call it pentaoxide, we call it pentoxide. Please omit the letter A. Okay? Now, we have exceptions to the rule. Basta natay rule na, yun na siya exception pirme. We have molecular compounds class that do not really follow the guidelines, especially the use of prefixes. So these compounds are mostly those compounds with hydrogen in as their component. most of the time we call them in their common names. So just like water, you can see water on the screen. We don't really call water as dihydrogen monoxide. Instead, we call it water. Okay? So again, these are the exceptions to the rule. So just like B2H6, instead of calling it diboron hexahydride, diba? Hydrogen is hydride. Instead of calling that diboron hexahydride, we call this diborane. And then CH4 is not also called carbon tetrahydride. Instead, it's called methane. So ito yung mga examples na kailangan nyo na lang tandaan. NH3 is ammonia, SiH4 is silane. So again, most of them do contain hydrogen in their formula. PH3, instead of phosphorus trihydride, we call it phosphine or phosphine. And then again, H2O is water. And then H2S is hydrogen sulfide. So instead of calling it dihydrogen sulfide or dihydrogen monosulfide, automatic na hydrogen sulfide na siya agad. Again, these are the exceptions to the use of Greek prefixes. Anyway, konti lang naman yan sila. So ang gawin nyo is tandaan nyo na lang sila. The rest class will follow the guidelines. So again, to summarize our naming for our inorganic compounds, we have here a table, a diagram on the screen. So first, the first thing that you need to do is to identify whether they are ionic or molecular. Again, identify first whether ionic sila or molecular. Syempre kung ionic, you have the presence of the cations, the metals, or we only have one polyatomic ion na positively charged, the ammonia. The ammonium. And then the anion can be our nonmetals and other polyatomic ion. Now, how are we going to name them? Kapag cation has only one charge, meaning ang metal na ito ay may isang charge lang. Like sodium, silver, aluminum. Anong gagawin? Name the metal first as is yung pangalan niya. And then the anion, kung ang anion natin ay non-metal, we will change the ending into IDE. Pero pag polyatomic ion, just write the name of the polyatomic ion directly. Pero kapag cation has more than one charge, kagaya ng iron, positive 2 or positive 3, anong gagawin? Name the metal first. The same ang name niya. And then you have to specify the charge of the cation using the Roman numerals written inside the open and close parentheses. And then yung second part na anion, ganun pa rin, mag-e-end pa rin siya sa IDE, or kung polyatomic ion, just name the polyatomic anion. So ganun lang, paulit-ulit lang itong ating guidelines. Pero kapag nakita nyo, it's between a non-metal and a non-metal, dito tayo sa molecular compounds. So there again, binary compounds between nonmetals and nonmetals, and that's the time we use the prefixes like mono, di, tri, and so on. Except for the first element, kapag kaisang atom lang siya, no need to use mono. But the second element should always end with IDE. So kagaya nito. How do we name this? What's the name of S2Cl4? What's the first thing to do? Classify whether this is ionic or molecular. So class, ano ito? Ionic or molecular?
Molecular.
Okay, very good. This is molecular. Bakit molecular? Kasi sulfur is a non-metal and chlorine is also a non-metal. So kung molecular siya, gagamit tayo ng prefixes. So ano ngayon ang pangalan ng compound na ito?
Disulfur tetrachloride.
Okay, very good. Disulfur. Di kasi dalawang sulfur. And then apat na chlorine, so tetra. And then remember, the second element will always end with IDE. So instead of chlorine, we call it chloride. Disulfur tetrachloride. Okay, that's how you name it ha. Identify first whether ionic siya or molecular. Okay, questions about this? Anyone na na-confuse about sa naming? Wala, kasali ito sa exam nyo both sa lecture ug sa lab. Now, yes, Jodel.
Teacher, i-clarify ko lang po, kapag sa second element po, doon lang po kasabi na gagamit ng prefix na mono po.
Yeah, sa second element lang tayo gagamit ng mono. Kapag kaisa, isang atom siya.
Okay po.
Okay. Next, let's have the acids class. Ano ang definition natin ng acids? Acids are substances that give hydrogen ion, especially if they are dissolved in water. So yan yung pinaka ginagamit na definition ng acids. Meron tayong hydrogen kapag ka acid. And how are we going to name our acids class? Again, anion whose names end in IDE form acids with a hydro prefix and an ending na IC. So, unsa daw? If anion, ang ending ng anion ay IDE, pag naging acid siya, meron siyang prefix na hydro, tapos yung pangalan ng anion, pero instead of IDE, mag-e-end na siya sa IC. Okay? And the word acid. So ano ba example niyan? Example, HCl. Now, the presence of hydrogen here makes this an acid. Again, the presence of hydrogen here makes this an acid. So ang tawag sa kanya, sa chlorine, di ba? Chloride. Chloride. So ang magiging pangalan nito, again, ang prefix niya ay hydro. Tapos ang name ng anion, so this is chlorine. So instead of chloride, ang ending niya ay magiging IC. So this is called now chloric. Ayan, and the word acid. Sabi kayo mong iro. Okay, hydrochloric acid. Okay? Again, ang tawag dyan ay hydrochloric acid. That's how you name the acid. So let me give you another example. Paano naman itong HI? Ganyan lang, HI lang talaga siya. How do you name this? The presence of the hydrogen there makes it an acid. Nasa unahan ng hydrogen na yung mga exceptions kanina sa molecular compounds, nasa huli si hydrogen except for water and hydrogen sulfide. For this time, nasa unahan si hydrogen. Ano magiging pangalan nito? The first word, the first one na isusulat nyo ay ang prefix na hydro. Tapos, the anion. What is the anion? Iodine or iodide. Pero ano ang magiging ending niya?
Iodic.
Instead of IDE, this will end with IC. So this is now called hydroiodic and then the word acid. Okay? That's how we name acids class. Hydroiodic acids. But actually, you can call this hydrogen iodide. It's just for the sake of the acid siya. Especially if they become gas, this will become acid kasi or liquid. Next, how about this one? Ano tawag sa kanya? HF.
Hydrofluoric acid, ma'am.
Okay, very good. This is hydro. And then, fluoride, but instead of ending na IDE, gagawin mo siyang fluoric. And then, the word acid. That is also true for HBr, hydro, and then this is bromide here. So, gagawin mong IC ang ending niya. We call this hydrobromic acid. Okay, that is how you name. But my examples here are just basic acids. Okay, basic acids lang ito. Kapag ka basic acid, that's how you name them. Hydro plus the name of the anion ending in IC and the word acid. Now let's move on to the more complicated types of acid. This is still the same hydrochloric acid, or you can call them hydrogen chloride if it is a molecular compound. These are just simple acids ha. Bigay ko na yung example na HI, though wala si HF dyan, pero you have the hydrobromic acid. Yeah, and the hydrocyanic acid and the hydrosulfuric acid or the hydrogen sulfide. Let's move on to the more complicated acids. We call them oxoacids. Bakit oxoacids? They have the hydrogen and they also have the oxygen. Ang common sa oxoacids class, they start with hydrogen, they end with oxygen, and they have a central element. So iba-iba yung central element nila. So how do we name now the oxoacid? So ganito lang yan siya. Ganito ang partnering natin. Meron tayong polyatomic ions na nag-end sa 8. When we name them sa acids, instead of the ending na 8, we will use IC for the acid. Okay? And then, ang partner naman ng ite is OUS. So, ano ang ibig sabihin ko dito? Like this one, H2CO3. H2 is hydrogen, right? That makes it an acid. And as you can see, CO3, look at your index cards. CO3 is a polyatomic ion. What's the name of the CO3? Anong pangalan ni
Carbonate, ma'am.
Carbonate. So, ang mangyayari yan class, kapag ka naging oxoacid siya, instead of carbonate, kunin mo yung 8 dyan, palitan mo ng IC, plus idagdag mo yung word na acid. So, ang tawag sa kanya ay carbonic acid. Again, ang tawag sa kanya ay carbonic acid. I hope nasundan yon. Again, tingnan nyo yung, kasi hydrogen, matic na yan, that will become the acid here, kaya may word na acid. Ang titingnan nyo next ay yung polyatomic ion, CO3. Ano ang pangalan niya, di ba? It's called carbonate. Tapos ang gagawin nyo in the naming sa acid, palitan nyo ng IC pag carbonate. Pero kung ite yan siya class, ang ipapalit nyo ay OUS. Okay? So we have another example on the screen. We have the chloric acid. Bakit naging chloric acid yan siya? H becomes the acid. And then look at your index cards. Anong pangalan ni ClO3?
Chlorate, ma'am.
Okay, the ClO3 is called chlorate. So para maging acid siya, ang partner ni 8 ay IC. So ang gagawin natin, kunin natin yan si 8, instead papalitan natin siya ng IC. Kaya ang tawag sa HClO3 ay chloric acid. So paano nyo malalaman na acid siya? Class, take note of the hydrogen here and the ending na oxygen. And meron lang silang central atom. So this is also true for nitric acid. Remember NO3? What is the name of NO3?
Nitrate.
Nitrate. So get rid of the 8, palitan mo siya ng IC, and then for hydrogen, lagyan mo ng word na acid. That's how you name oxoacids. Again, we call that nitric acid. The same thing with H3PO4. Diba? Remember, PO4 is phosphate. So, get rid of the 8. Palitan mo siya ng IC. And then, dagdagan mo ng word na acid. Kaya, H3PO4 is called phosphoric acid. Meron siya hydrogen. And then, how about H2SO4? This is class SO4 is
Sulfate.
sulfate. Pero for this one, get rid of the 8, palitan mo siya ng IC, pero hindi siya tinatawag na sulfic acid ha. Ibalik mo yung UR ni sulfur. So the correct name for this is sulfuric acid. So these are actually inorganic acids. They don't have carbon except for carbonic acid. But remember, yung may mga carbonate class are considered inorganic. Mga inorganic acids natin sila and they are strong acids. Kapag inorganic acids, strong acids sila, most likely masunog yung ka if ma-add to siya sa imuhang skin, especially if mainom nimo, sunog jud imuhang esophagus ana and imuhang digestive tract. Okay? Now, another thing that you have to take note for these oxoacids, there are a lot of oxoacids class na they have the same central elements. Again, they have the same central elements. Let me give you an example. HClO4, HClO3, where do I place the others? HClO2 and HClO. These are all acids. They have hydrogen, they have chlorine. What's their difference? The number of oxygen. So, ano yung gagawin natin sa kanila? Balik tayo doon sa naming. Yung nag-end sa 8, hanapin nyo dyan class sa kanila ang polyatomic ion na nag-end sa 8. Kasi automatic si hydrogen acid na yan. So ClO4, ClO3, ClO2, and ClO. Alin dyan ang tinatawag na chlorate?
ClO3.
ClO3. Okay. The ClO3, HClO3, si ClO3 yung chlorate. So, di ba, paano natin i-name pag nag-end sa 8? Papalitan natin siya ng IC and then magiging chloric acid siya. Okay? Again, hanapin nyo lang ang 8 kasi si 8 will become the IC na acid. So, chloric acid siya. Now, hanapin nyo saan dyan ang ite ang ending. Chlorite. ClO4, ClO2, or ClO?
ClO2.
Okay, ClO2. Kapag ganyan class, yung chlorite, di ba chlorite siya, tanggalin nyo yung ITE, and ang partner ni ite ay OUS. So, gagawin nyo siyang OUS and then the word acid. That is chlorous acid. That's how you name them. Go back to the polyatomic ion, determine the ion that ends with 8, and pag magiging acid siya, siya yung magiging IC na acid. And then kapag ite naman ang ending ng kanyang polyatomic ion, pag naging acid siya, magiging OUS ang kanyang ending. Well, nandyan pa rin yung root word ng anion. So, instead of chlorate, since naging acid na siya, nadagdagan siya ng hydrogen, ang tawag sa kanya ay chloric acid. And then HClO2 will become chlorous acid. So, ite to OUS pag naging acid siya. Now, kung tatanungin nyo, paano naman yung HClO4 and HClO? Ano mangyayari dyan? Ang tandaan nyo class, kapag ka nag-plus 1 ka dito sa IC, again, pag nag-plus 1 ka, so naging ClO4 siya. That's the time gagamit ka ng prefix na per. Prefix siya, meaning nasa unahan siya. Kaya tatawagin mo ngayon, dagdagan mo lang ng per. Perchloric acid. Diba this is our base here, HClO3. Chloric yan siya, chloric. Pag nadagdagan siya ng isa, gamit ka ng prefix na per. So, perchloric acid. Again, perchloric acid. Now, dito tayo sa baba. HClO2, di ba this is the chlorous acid. From ite, naging OUS. Kapag ka nabawasan pa siya ng isa class, Like this one, 2, naging isa na lang ang oxygen niya. That's the time you use the prefix na hypo. Okay? So yung chlorous acid, dagdagan mo lang ng prefix na hypo. This is called hypochlorous acid. That's how we name them. Nasundan pa to. Medyo daghan-daghan jud. So I'll be giving you another example. Can I erase the writings on the screen? Anyway, this one is being recorded. So I'll give you another example on the screen. Let's have first the these are all acids. You have hydrogen, we have oxygen, and sulfur as the central element. But how do we name them? H2SO3 and H2SO4. Oh, i-post na ko, kaya na. Pagkahuman. Para na may copy. Sige daw, you try. I-apply nyo yung guideline na sinabi ko. So how do you call now H2SO3 and H2SO4? Meron na bang naka-answer dyan?
Sulfurous acid, ma'am.
Ang alin?
H2SO3 to sulfuric acid pang H2SO4.
Okay, so ganito class. Ang gagawin nyo, syempre may mga acid talaga yan sila sa name, no? So, wait. So silang dalawa, may acid talaga yan sa name. Now, ang next nyong gagawin is to look for this one. These are polyatomic ions. So SO3 class is called sulfite. Tama? Tingnan nyo yung ano nyo dyan, index cards. Tapos, SO4 is called sulfate. Diba? This is called sulfate. So ano nga ang partner ng ite? Ite is OUS.
OUS, ma'am.
So instead of sulfite, magiging, sabi ko sa inyo, ibalik nyo yung UR ni sulfur. So this will be called sulfurous acid. So susulat natin siya dito, sulfurous acid. And then, itong 8, ang partner ng 8 ay IC. So get rid of that. Balik niyo yung UR ni sulfur kasi hindi natin siya tinatawag na sulfurous acid and sulfic acid. Tatawagin natin siyang sulfuric acid. So ito na ngayon ang pangalan nila. Sulfurous acid and sulfuric acid. So, before time mag-end, let me give you another example. Ay, tama rin. This one. HiO4, HiO, HiO2, HiO. Lahat sila may hydrogen, lahat may oxygen. So this one, these are all oxo acids. Okay, they are all oxo acid. Sige, kayo muna and then let's check later. Wala lang kay quiz aning activity ha, kaya I don't have time na. Hanapin nyo sa index card. Ang una nyong hanapin yung nag-end sa 8 para mas madali. Kasi lahat sila may acid na dyan. Due to the presence of the hydrogen. May acid talaga yan sa pangalan nila. So, alin dyan ang anong class? Nag-end sa 8. IO4, 3, 2, or 1?
IO3, ma'am.
IO3.
IO3. So, IO3 ang tinatawag natin na iodate. So, para maging acid siya, labas mo yan. And then, ano yung magiging ending ng name niya? Instead of 8?
IC po.
IC. So, this is iodic. This is called iodic acid. Okay? Now, sino si iodide? Iodide.
IO2, ma'am.
IO2. So, this is the iodide. And ano ang partner ni iod? Ang partner niya ay OU.
Yes.
So, anong tawag sa kanya?
Iodus.
Okay, iodus acid. Okay. Now, ano nga pag mag plus 1 ka dito sa iodic acid, kagaya nito, 3 plus 4, ay 3 plus 1, naging 4 siya. Ano yung prefix na gagamitin natin?
Per iodine.
Okay, per. So, idadagdag mo lang siya dyan sa iodic acid, magiging per iodic acid siya. Pero dito sa iodus acid, pag nag-minus 1 tayo, ano yung prefix na gagamitin?
Hypo, ma'am.
Hypo. Okay, this is hypo here. So, idadagdag mo lang din siya sa iodus. This will be called hypoiodous acid. Okay? Hypoiodous acid, iodus, iodic, and periodic acid. So, wag kayo malito class sa hypo, ano yung binigay ko kanina? Hydro. Hydroiodic. Ay magkalibog class sa hydroiodic acid ha. Okay, this one is iodic, this one is hydroiodic. Ang kaibahan nila class pag sinabing hydroiodic acid, HI lang yan siya. So ang ibig sabihin kapag meron kang prefix dyan na hydro, meaning wala kang oxygen. Hydroiodic acid. Pero kapag may oxygen, sundin nyo itong guideline dito. Okay? Questions about sa naming ng ating acids? Anyone? I'll give you a copy of this ha, para ma-review nyo. So those are just oxoacids. Definitely pag kunan natin siya ng hydrogen class, ang tawag na sa kanya ay oxoanions. Kagaya nito, phosphoric acid. PO4 is phosphate, kaya siya yung tinatawag nating phosphoric acid. Kapag kunan natin siya ng hydrogen, like this one, instead of H3PO4, naging H2PO4, negative na siya, naging anion na siya. Ayan, ang tawag natin dyan again, oxoanion. Nabubuo si oxoanion kapag kukunan natin ng hydrogen si acid. We call this dihydrogen kasi meron siyang dalawang hydrogen, and PO4 is called phosphate. So dihydrogen phosphate. Nakunan mo pa siya ng isang hydrogen na lang pero magiging -2 na siya, we call it hydrogen phosphate. And kung kunin mo lahat ng hydrogen, yung polyatomic ion na lang talaga ang matitira class. Si PO4 -3, which we call phosphate. Now, when are you going to encounter these oxoanions? During chemical reactions class. Again, during chemical reactions, they can be products of chemical reactions, especially if the process is like removing the hydrogen. Makikita natin si oxoanions. So we have here, lastly on the screen, the name of the oxoanacids and their oxoanions. Ang ibig sabihin, pag kinuna natin sila ng hydrogen. So like this perchloric acid, if you remove hydrogen, the corresponding anion is called perchlorate. Kasi ClO4 na lang ang natira. So ClO3 is chlorate, ClO2 is chlorite, and ClO is hypochlorite. Again, we call them oxoanions if we remove the hydrogen. So for the meantime, I guess dyan lang muna ako mag-e-end. Yung ibang part ng itong naming ng inorganic compounds will be discussed sa midterm. And yun lang, hanggang doon lang yung magiging coverage ng ating lab exam. Okay, hanggang dito lang ang coverage ng lab exam. I'll be giving you the copy of the slides and also the recording. Kasi baka yung iba nakatulog na dyan. Natulog na kailan, may kayo tulog hapon 1:30 to 4:30. So para ma-review ninyo before the exam. I'll just convert this and then afterward, I'll give you the link.